Birmingham, October 1992. Inside the First Baptist Church of Ensley, mourners gather around a casket. The organist plays softly, and somewhere in the congregation, someone hums the opening notes of Just My Imagination. But the voice that should be carrying that falsetto, the voice that once floated above orchestras and made millions weep, is silent now. Eddie Kendricks is dead at 52, lung cancer, 30 years of cigarettes, a voice stolen by the very breath that gave it life. But here's the paradox that haunts this story. Eddie Kendricks was one of the architects of Motown's most legendary group, a co-founder of the Temptations, whose falsetto defined an entire era of soul music. He sang lead on songs that are now considered American classics. He scored #1 hits as a solo artist and helped birth disco itself. Yet when he died, he was broke, forgotten by the industry he helped build, and buried in a cemetery in the same Birmingham neighborhood where his dreams first began. This is the story of how a voice that couldn't be contained by one of the greatest groups in history ultimately couldn't escape the weight of choices, cigarettes, and cruel timing. If you love uncovering hidden legends like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Legends Underrated, and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The year is 1947, Ensley, Birmingham, Alabama. Inside a modest church, two boys stand in the choir, their voices lifting above the congregation. One is Paul Williams, smooth and controlled. The other is Eddie Kendricks, born Edward James Kendrick on December 17th, 1939 in Union Springs, Alabama. And even at 7 years old, his falsetto carries a supernatural quality. It doesn't just reach the high notes, it lives there. Eddie's parents, Johnny and Lee Bell Kendrick, had moved the family to Birmingham's Ensley neighborhood when Eddie was still young. He had one sister, Patricia, and three brothers, Charles, Robert, and Clarence. The Kendricks weren't wealthy, but they had church, and church had music. And in the Jim Crow South, where opportunities for black boys were suffocated by segregation, music felt like the only door that might open. Eddie and Paul became inseparable, best friends, brothers in every way that mattered. They sang together at church, on street corners, at local talent shows. And by 1955, they'd gathered two more friends, Kel Osborne and Willie Waller, and formed a doo-wop group called the Cavaliers. They were good, really good. Good enough that by 1957, they decided Birmingham was too small. They needed to go north, where the music industry was exploding. So Eddie, Paul, and Kel packed their bags and moved to Cleveland, Ohio. Willie stayed behind. Cleveland didn't deliver the dream. Eddie washed dishes at the Majestic Hotel on 55th and Central, performing in the hotel's Rose Room whenever he could. But it wasn't enough. Then they met Milton Jenkins, a manager who saw something in them. Jenkins convinced them to move again, this time to Detroit, Motor City, the beating heart of black music in America. They renamed themselves the Primes. And under Jenkins' management, they started to build a reputation. They even inspired a female spin-off group that rehearsed alongside them, a group called the Primettes. You know them better as the Supremes. But success always has an expiration date when you're young and hungry. In 1961, Kel Osborne left for California to chase a solo career. The Primes disbanded. Eddie and Paul were back at square one. Then Otis Williams called. Otis had his own group called The Distance, but it was falling apart. He needed new members. He'd seen Eddie perform. He'd watched Paul's choreography. He knew they were special. So Otis, along with Melvin Franklin and Elbridge Bryant, joined forces with Eddie and Paul to create something new. They called themselves the Elgins, but there was already a group with that name, so they changed it. The Temptations. 1964, Motown Records. Producer Smokey Robinson walks into the studio with a song called The Way You Do the Things You Do. It's light, playful, romantic, and Smokey knows exactly who should sing it. Eddie Kendricks steps up to the microphone. That falsetto, angelic, weightless, impossibly smooth, wraps itself around the melody. The song becomes the group's first top 20 hit. And just like that, the Temptations are on their way. Over the next 4 years, Eddie's voice becomes synonymous with Motown's golden age. I'll Be in Trouble, Girl, Why You Wanna Make Me Blue, Get Ready in 1966, where Eddie's falsetto practically levitates off the record. And behind the scenes, Eddie isn't just singing, he's creating most of the group's vocal arrangements. He's serving as wardrobe manager, picking out the now famous purple suits the group wore on stage. His bandmates nickname him Cornbread because he loves it so much. But even as the Temptations climb towards superstardom, Eddie feels something gnawing at him. He doesn't fully trust the people managing them. He meets Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, only a handful of times. And when he does, Eddie senses coldness. Berry Gordy is a man. I don't know, Eddie would later say. I know he didn't particularly care for me. In a 1991 interview, Eddie admitted he'd considered leaving as early as 1965. Things weren't quite proper, he said. They were working with people who didn't have their best interests at heart. But Eddie stayed. He stayed because leaving felt too risky. He stayed because the Temptations were finally achieving the success they dreamed about in church choirs back in Birmingham. He stayed. But the cracks were already forming. 1968. Norman Whitfield, Motown's new hotshot producer, has a vision: psychedelic soul, 7-minute funk odysseys, Cloud 9, I Can't Get Next to You, Ball of Confusion. The Temptations are evolving and the world is eating it up. But Eddie Kendricks hates it. He'd fallen in love with the romantic ballads Smokey Robinson produced, the smooth, elegant sound that made you close your eyes and sway. This new sound, raw, gritty, experimental, feels wrong to him. And worse, Eddie isn't singing lead anymore. Now all 5 members trade lines over funk rock grooves. His falsetto, once the centerpiece, is just another color in Whitfield's psychedelic palette. And then there's Paul Williams, Eddie's best friend since childhood, the man who'd been by his side through every move, every struggle. Paul is sick, really sick. He's battling alcoholism and health problems that make it harder and harder for him to perform. When Paul's on stage, Eddie feels less alone. But when Paul's gone, Eddie is surrounded by tension. Otis Williams and Melvin Franklin, no relation to Paul, are running the group now, and Eddie clashes with them constantly. The arguments get louder, the resentments deepen. David Ruffin, the group's other lead singer, had been fired in 1968 for his ego and drug problems. Eddie starts reconnecting with David, and David tells him the same thing over and over. Leave, Eddie. Get out while you can. Stories like these are why I built Legends Underrated. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more untold legends. November 1970. The Temptations are booked for a 2-night engagement at the Copacabana nightclub in New York City. It should be routine, but between the first and second shows, Eddie gets into one final confrontation with Otis and Melvin. We don't know exactly what was said, but we know what happened next. Eddie walked out. He didn't come back for the second show. He didn't come back at all. It was over. Eddie Kendricks, one of the 5 original Temptations, one of the voices that built the group's legend, was gone. But before he officially left, there was one last song to record. January 1971, a ballad called just my imagination running away with me. Eddie's voice floats over the melody like a dream. It's tender, vulnerable, achingly beautiful. The kind of song that makes you believe in love even when you know it's slipping away. The song is released in January. By April, it's #1 on both the pop and R&B charts. But by then, Eddie Kendricks is already gone. He signed a solo deal with Motown's Tamla label. He's working on his first album, All By Myself. And while the Temptations continue their string of hits under Norman Whitfield, Eddie is starting over from scratch. It doesn't go well. His first 2 years as a solo artist are brutal. Singles that miss the top 40, radio stations that ignore him, and then the Temptations release a song called Superstar, Remember How You Got Where You Are. A not so subtle jab at Eddie and David Ruffin for thinking they could make it on their own. Eddie must have wondered if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, but then something unexpected happened. 1972. Eddie releases an album called People Hold On. It features a 7-minute track called Girl, You Need a Change of Mind. The song doesn't get much radio play, but underground DJs in New York City discover it. They play it in the clubs, and the dance floors go wild. Eddie's producer, Frank Wilson, realizes they're onto something, so they craft a new song with the same infectious groove. It's called Keep On Truckin'. July 29th, 1973, Keep On Truckin' is released. The title comes from an old blues phrase, and Eddie knows it'll resonate with multiple audiences. The old people used to truck when they were dancing, he explained, and I knew the trucking industry would embrace the record. He was right. The song is an 8-minute groove built on Leonard Caston Jr., his blistering clavinet, and Gary Coleman's glistening vibes. Eddie's falsetto floats above it all, playful and confident. And buried in the lyrics is a little revenge. And Old Temptations' Rain, I'm ducking. For your love, through sleet or snow, I'm trucking. By November 4th, 1973, Keep On Truckin' hits #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It stays there for 2 weeks. It also tops the R&B charts. The song sells over 1 million copies, earning Eddie a gold record. It's arguably the first disco song to ever hit #1. Eddie Kendricks, the man who'd been dismissed, mocked, and written off, is now the only former Temptation to score a #1 solo hit in the United States. 3 months later, Boogie Down follows. It reaches #2 on the pop chart and #1 on R&B, staying there for 3 weeks. For a brief, shining moment, Eddie Kendricks is a superstar, but the music industry is cruel to those who burn too bright. And Eddie's fire was already starting to flicker. 1975, Shoe Shine Boy becomes Eddie's last major hit. After that, the singles chart lower. The albums sell less. By 1978, Eddie leaves Motown entirely, bouncing between Arista, Atlantic, and RCA. Nothing sticks. And there's something else. Something Eddie can't escape. Cigarettes. He's been smoking for decades. 3 packs a day, sometimes more. And slowly, relentlessly, they're stilling his voice. The falsetto that once soared effortlessly now strains to hit the high notes. The breath control that made him a legend starts to fail. In 1982, Eddie and David Ruffin briefly rejoined the Temptations for a reunion tour and album. But during recording sessions, Eddie struggles. His bandmate Dennis Edwards notices it. He had problems hitting the higher notes, Edwards later recalled. Eddie goes to a doctor. The diagnosis is devastating. A pin drop of cancer on one of his lungs. But Eddie refuses chemotherapy. He's terrified of losing his hair. So he ignores it, keeps smoking, keeps performing. 1985, Eddie and David team up with Daryl Hall and John Oates for a live album at the Apollo Theater. They perform at Live Aid in Philadelphia. For a moment, it feels like a comeback. 1989. Eddie, David, and the other original Temptations are inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It's a night of celebration, of recognition, but Eddie knows the truth. His voice is fading, his body is failing. And then on June 1st, 1991, David Ruffin dies. It happens in Philadelphia. A crack house, an overdose. David collapses and is rushed to the hospital where he's pronounced dead at 3:55 a.m. He's 50 years old. The money from their recent European tour, nearly $300,000, disappears with him. Eddie attends David's funeral. He sits in a church pew, hunched over, head in his hands, weeping. They'd been friends since the Temptations. They'd fought the same battles, chased the same dreams, survived the same industry, and now David is gone. Eddie knows he doesn't have much time either. Late 1991. Eddie is living back in Birmingham, Alabama. The cancer has spread. Doctors perform surgery, removing one of his lungs. Eddie believes the disease is punishment for 30 years of smoking. I did this to myself, he tells friends, but Eddie refuses to stop. In the summer of 1992, even with one lung, he's back on tour, performing, singing, pushing his body to the edge. By late summer, his body gives out, he's hospitalized, the cancer has won. October 5th, 1992, 10:35 p.m., Baptist Medical Center, Princeton, Birmingham. Eddie Kendricks dies. He's 52 years old, the same age Melvin Franklin will be when he dies 3 years later, the same age that seems to claim so many temptations too soon. Eddie leaves behind 3 children, Paris, Acre, and Paul, named after Paul Williams, the best friend who died in 1973 under circumstances still debated to this day. This twist shocked the world, and if you never want to miss stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to Legends Underrated, and don't forget to like the video if this story moved you. Eddie Kendricks is buried at Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham. Back home, back where it started, in the same neighborhood where a little boy with a falsetto once sang in a church choir and dared to dream bigger than Jim Crow would allow. On October 16th, 1999, the city of Birmingham dedicates Eddie Kendrick Memorial Park. A bronze statue of Eddie stands at the corner of 18th Street and 4th Avenue North. Behind him, sculptures of the other Temptations are set into a granite wall. The names of their hit songs are inscribed in stone. Recorded music plays throughout the park. Eddie's voice, still soaring, still perfect, still alive. Because here's the final truth about Eddie Kendricks. The industry forgot him. The charts moved on. The money disappeared. But the music endured. His voice has been sampled by Ice Cube, Lil Wayne, Nas, Erica, Badu, and hundreds of others. Alicia Keys built Unbreakable around his 1977 track, Intimate Friends. Kendrick Lamar's mother named her son after Eddie because she loved his music so much. And every time someone plays Just My Imagination, or Keep On Truckin', or The Way You Do the Things You Do, that falsetto is there. Weightless, timeless, untouchable. Eddie Kendricks spent his life trying to escape the shadow of the Temptations. But in the end, he didn't need to, because his voice became something bigger than any group, any label, any industry. It became immortal.